Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We are unpacking a really fascinating and, honestly, pretty complex situation developing right now in the Middle East. You see, for the last 55 years, the United Arab Emirates has carefully, intentionally cultivated this legacy as a global safe haven. Think of it as a glittering oasis of stability and investment. But, according to the source material we're analyzing today, that carefully constructed image, well, it's facing an unprecedented threat. In fact, the source describes the UAE's current geopolitical and economic trajectory not just as a hurdle, but as jumping into a blind alley, a situation where, frankly, the bottom is unknown and the way out is entirely unclear. Now, you might be wondering, can the UAE bounce back this time? And it's a completely valid question. After all, the UAE has a remarkable history of resilience. I mean, they successfully navigated the devastating 2008 global financial crash. They bounced back incredibly well from the economic freeze of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the analysis we're diving into today suggests that those past crises were fundamentally different. This present geopolitical crisis strikes right at the very core of what actually makes the UAE attractive to the rest of the world. So, can they just shake it off this time, or has that 55-year golden era hit a definitive wall? Let's find out. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. A safe haven no more. 2. Economic shockwaves. 3. The geopolitical catalyst. 4. The Iranian warnings. 5. The Oman contrast. And finally, 6. An uncertain future. Let's start with Section 1. A safe haven no more. The 55-year legacy. Before we get into the current crisis, we really need to understand the baseline. What exactly is at risk here? Well, for over 5 decades, literally since its independence in 1971, the UAE has essentially built a mini Europe in the Middle East. If you've ever flown through Dubai or done business in the region, you know exactly what I mean. They poured massive capital into record-breaking attractions like the iconic Burj Khalifa, creating an absolute magnet for tourism and international business. They became the undisputed top destination for multinational regional headquarters. Pre-war, their hotel occupancy rates were just phenomenal, regularly hitting 80 to 100%. And strategically, they maintained this brilliant, plausible deniability. They balanced global partnerships very quietly, keeping the focus strictly on business, luxury, and safety. It was, for all intents and purposes, an economic engine fueled entirely by global confidence. Moving on to Section 2, Economic Shockwaves, the Cost of Conflict. Shifting our focus from that glittering past, let's translate the current geopolitical tension into hard, unavoidable numbers detailed in the source data. The UAE is home to some of the largest, most capital-intensive construction projects in the world. But the inflation happening right now is a real game changer. The data highlights catastrophic spikes across the board. Pump prices alone have surged by an unbelievable 127%. Regular concrete is up 52%. And steel, literally the backbone of all this towering infrastructure, is up 40%. This isn't just a minor fluctuation, folks. It's a massive structural shock to the region's most visible industry. And the rising costs absolutely don't stop at steel and regular concrete. The costs are rising relentlessly across practically all foundational materials. Cement, up 36%. Hollow bricks have spiked an incredible 57%. White and black sand are up 40 and 42% respectively. And beyond just construction, the source notes uncharted spikes in the costs of fertilizer, gas, and jet fuel. So everyday life alongside large-scale development is becoming exponentially more expensive. So what does this all mean? Well, the crucial takeaway here is a truly staggering forecast from Moody's, which the source cites. Remember those 80 to 100% hotel occupancy rates we talked about just a minute ago? Those rates are projected to plummet all the way down to a mere 10% in the coming quarter. 10%. When your entire economic model relies heavily on a continuous, confident influx of global tourists and business leaders, a drop to 10% occupancy is nothing short of a seismic event. Let's look at Section 3, the geopolitical catalyst, shifting alliances. Okay, so what is actually driving these massive economic shocks? The source points directly to shifting geopolitical alliances and the UAE's perceived alignment with the US and Israel. It builds a very clear timeline of escalation. Starting on February 28th, the UAE reported intercepting an astonishing 3,000 drone and missile attacks. That sheer volume of attacks really raised global questions about why the UAE was suddenly being targeted so heavily. Then, on April 18th, UAE Minister Reem al-Hashimi gave an interview addressing this exact friction. But the real kicker came post-ceasefire, with alleged visits to the UAE by the Mossad chief and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. These visits essentially blew their geopolitical cover. Remember that plausible deniability strategy we discussed earlier? The source argues it was completely shattered by these highly visible, very controversial visits. Now, to understand the UAE's perspective on why they believe they're facing these pressures, the source highlights a very specific quote from the UAE state minister back on April 18th. She stated, "We are everything that Iran is not." The core argument presented here is that the UAE is being targeted precisely because of its immense prosperity, its global investment appeal, and its shining infrastructure, drawing a very sharp, deliberate contrast with the policies and current state of its regional rival.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Iranian warnings, a direct threat.
In response to these shifting alliances, Iranian officials haven't stayed quiet. They've issued some severe, very public warnings. The source provides a direct quote from Iranian Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araki, and I want to read it exactly as it was stated. He said, "Enmity with the great people of Iran is a foolish gamble. Colluding with Israel in doing so is unforgivable. Those colluding with Israel to sow divisions will be held to account." That is a highly diplomatic, yet incredibly direct threat. It explicitly targets any state in the region that Iran views as colluding with Israel, making it crystal clear that such actions are seen as an unforgivable offense carrying real consequences. And the rhetoric gets even more specific when we look at claims from semi-official Iranian spokespersons like Professor Morandi, who is heavily featured in the source. Morandi asserts that Iran actually has deep intelligence penetration inside the UAE. Why? Because of the UAE's really unique demographic makeup. You have roughly 1.12 million citizens surrounded by nearly 9 million expatriates. Because of this, Morandi claims the UAE can't hide anything. He asserts that Iran knows the exact locations of Israeli radars and Mossad bases. Plus, he goes on to accuse the UAE of allowing U.S. jets to use their airspace for operations, and even claims the UAE actively pressured Saudi Arabia and Qatar to join the conflict. Now, whether these specific claims are entirely true or not, the source emphasizes a key takeaway. These statements are being aggressively weaponized to intimidate the UAE. Moving on to Section 5, the Oman contrast, a tale of two paths. To truly grasp the magnitude of the UAE's current situation, we have to look right next door at an alternative geopolitical model. On one hand, you have the UAE, which the source describes as pursuing somewhat aggressive regional policies in places like Yemen and the Horn of Africa, right alongside its alleged cooperation with the US and Israel, and as a result, they are now facing severe economic and security threats. But on the other hand, you have Oman. Oman outright refused to participate in the recent conflict. They maintain strict absolute neutrality. And because of this, the source points out that Oman is currently completely untouched by the chaos. In fact, they are safely reaping the economic benefits of their own stability. The source even highlights a fascinating specific example of Oman's diplomatic approach. It's referred to as the Hormuz model. Because Iranian and Omani territorial waters overlap in the super vital Strait of Hormuz, Iran proposed a cooperative maritime taxation model. The whole idea is to seamlessly split shipping tolls equally. So for example, if a toll is $2, $1 goes to Iran and $1 goes to Oman. It's a pretty smart example of how cooperation can create mutual economic benefits. Ultimately, it highlights a diplomatic, de-escalatory path that the source suggests that the UAE completely bypassed in favor of its current alliances. Let's wrap up with Section 6, an uncertain future. What comes next? Bringing all of these different threads together, what do these maneuvers actually mean for the UAE's long-term identity? Well, the source arrives at a very profound conclusion. The UAE is fundamentally transforming its core identity. It's actively shifting from being the region's ultimate safe haven into what is essentially a security state. By entering into these defense deals that alarm neighboring countries, the UAE is changing its entire value proposition. The illusion of being a completely neutral, impenetrable bubble of luxury and commerce? Yeah, that bubble has been pierced. And that identity shift brings us to the logical progression of risk that the source outlines. It's like a domino effect. Step 1, the geopolitical conflict totally shatters that safe haven perception. Once that perception is gone, we hit Step 2, the cold, hard math changes. Mandatory insurance premiums for operating at a conflict zone absolutely skyrocket, right along with general operational expenses. I mean, remember those massive construction and material inflations we looked at earlier? Finally, that leads directly to Step 3. Multinational companies, who obviously prioritize the safety of their assets and their bottom line, may begin executing plans to relocate their regional headquarters away from the UAE entirely. And that could deeply, deeply impact global corporate operations and international supply chains. Which brings us to our final thought for today. The UAE built a phenomenal, world-class economic engine based heavily on the promise of peace, luxury, and reliable returns. But as these rising geopolitical tensions force a pivot toward becoming a highly fortified security state, we really have to ask, will the security state permanently overwrite that 55-year mini-Europe legacy? I will leave you to ponder if the UAE's golden era can adapt, or if it has in fact definitively ended in a blind alley. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this source material today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.